Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for hurricane season reaching the peak. My name is Emily Stahl. I'm the Community and Media Relations Coordinator for Richland Library. We want to keep you and your family ahead of the storm by providing important and life-saving information. Over the next hour, our panel of local experts is diving into the present, past, and future aspects of the Atlantic hurricane season. The goal is to analyze current conditions, stream of information, and available assistance, review prior storms and the effects that they've had on our response and communication, and look ahead at what we still need to address. Before we get things underway, I want to share a couple of announcements with you. Throughout the panel discussion, please submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to as many of them as possible toward the end of the program. And a recording of the program will be made available on Richland Library's YouTube channel so people can access it on demand. Now I have the pleasure of introducing each of our panelists and asking that they turn on their cameras. So please join me in welcoming Efren Afante, WLTX Chief Meteorologist, Daniel Bonds, WLTX Meteorologist, Melody Cook, Direct Services Manager of the Palmetto SE region of the American Red Cross, and Andrew Phillips, Hurricane Program Manager of the South Carolina Emergency Management Division, also known as SEEMD. We are excited to share their expertise and engage in a meaningful conversation with all of you. So let's go ahead and get things started. First and foremost, I know we have Tropical Storm Fred that's on everyone's minds, Tropical Storm Grace, and some other activity that may be developing in the tropics. So Efren and Daniel, would you mind providing us a quick update, as well as if South Carolina will see any impact from these impending storms?
Well, since Daniel Bonds, our meteorologist, is at the station, I'll get him to talk about it, but I'll start off with this. Right now, Fred is not going to be an issue to us, but not only Fred, but Daniel, we've got a total of 3 things that we're watching.
Yeah, it's a busy time of year, and unfortunately, it looks like it's not going to stop anytime soon. So we got Fred out there right now. As Efren just said, not gonna be a big deal. May enhance our moisture slightly, but it's already warm and muggy out there anyway, so it's not really going to make a difference. But Grace is out there, and we also have another little wave or low pressure system that possibly could become a named storm over the next few days. Hurricane Center gives it about a 40% chance of further development. I think this one would be called Henri. Looks like Henry for us South Carolinians, but Henri. So it's going to be busy out there.
I think the important thing that, we're always thinking this time of the year, all of us South Carolinians is, okay, we're used to hurricane season. It comes around, and we're talking about 3. But the important thing to understand about the 3 is that 1, Fred, we thought might impact us. Now it's several hundred miles away from us. So it's something there, but it's not something for us. Then, of course, there's Grace, and still yet too early to tell. It's still in the Caribbean. Fortunately, it did not make a direct landfall on Puerto Rico, although Puerto Rico is getting a ton of rain. And then we've got this little swirly thing that's somewhere out in the North Atlantic. And I say swirly thing because it's probably going to do a U-turn somewhere out there. But is it uncommon to have 3 for August? No, not really. Fortunately, we don't have any indication, at least through the next several days, that any of them will be impacting us. So knock on wood, good thing.
Well, Efren and Daniel, we're so thankful that y'all are tracking everything that's happening out in the tropics right now. Melody and Andrew, what are your agencies doing to potentially prepare and respond should any of these storms impact us in the coming weeks?
Melody, I'll let you go first on that one if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. So what Red Cross is doing is we are listening to the people on this call right now. We're making sure we're in touch with everyone. We're communicating. We're listening to know what do we need to do. We're looking at our capacity in our workforce to make sure that we have the ability to respond appropriately depending on small scale or large scale disaster. We're also looking at the blood supply too, because American Red Cross nationally supplies 40% of the blood. So right now we're asking people to donate blood, give your time. And if you can afford to, please give financially and make donations too. So that's what we're really doing at American Red Cross right now.
And Melody, I think that's a key thing you said, communication right now, especially this early on. We talk about Fred, especially Grace. Not quite sure what the eventual impacts are going to be with that, but it's communication with our counties, state agencies, all of our partners to make sure that we're all working off the same information and we're preparing for the same thing. So this far out, that's usually when we're starting to look ahead to see what may this bring in several days that we may be having to prepare for now. Are there any shortfalls that we're going to have to be getting ahead of by the time we get closer to an event? So that's what we're looking at mainly at this point. Focusing on potential impacts and ways we may need to support our local partners, specifically the counties in the state.
You talk about looking ahead. We have seen the infamous photos and videos of South Carolinians trying to prepare ahead of the storm, sometimes with long lines as storms are coming ashore. And so what can families, what can individuals do right now to prepare to kind of prevent maybe some of those long lines happening in the future?
I can jump in right now because this is one of my favorites. You can start preparing. We call it Be Red Cross Ready. So build a kit, make a plan, be informed. Now's the time to go back. Thankfully, we're hearing that there's not going to be a large scale disaster. We're going to smooth, but we are smooth. This is going to smooth by, but we are in peak season. So now is the time to get ahead. Go to the grocery store, look at your supply kit, make sure that you have things there in place if you needed to shelter in place for up to 2 weeks, or if you need to evacuate, make sure you have your go bag. Make sure you know where you're going to stay informed. Make sure you know how you're going to communicate with loved ones. These are all things that you could be doing right now and should be doing right now to be prepared. And if you want more information, you can go any of our websites, get that information, and we'll tell you even more how to be prepared. So lots of stuff you could be doing to move you and your household forward, as well as moving your community forward in preparedness. It's all of us together, working together, that gets us through disasters.
What's the most important thing in y'all's go bags? Just kind of curious, pulling y'all.
See, I have two young kids, 2.5 and just under 10 months, so probably diapers right now.
And I'd say with teenagers, we have chargers just in case, extra chargers, things like that. Medicine, because we want to have extra medicine, that's vitally important, so we look at that. And just those are the two big things that I look for. My teenager, how's he's going to be covered, and then do we have our medicines? Those are the basics that I look for.
AfanteEfren.
You know, there was a big discussion about this several years ago here in South Carolina, and a couple of years ago when we did this up at the Richland Library in Sand Hill. One question that a lot of people asked was, well, what would you think out of the norm you would need to have with you in case we have hurricanes or in case you have evacuate? Well, you know, Melody already mentioned one of them, medicine. You have no idea how all of a sudden you have no medicine. It's like, oh my gosh, I left that at home. But 3 other things that you forget about because you really don't have it with you. We always leave with our driver's license or ID. We always have that on us. But what about the valuable paperwork that we don't have usually with us because we don't need it? Birth certificates, wedding certificates, home insurance or rental insurance papers, things of that nature. So in my to-go bag, one of the things is before we get to hurricane season, I take those valuable documents. my birth certificate, my son's birth certificate, the insurance to my house, and I stick that in a Ziploc bag. I put everything in a Ziploc bag, but you take that with you as if you were taking your driver's license, because in the event that something happens and the house is no longer there, at least the valuable documents that help you go forward to start rebuilding is already on your hands.
Yeah, one of the things I keep, and I keep it all the time, not just for a disaster, is I keep a little first aid kit in my car. I also keep a little portable generator. It's one of those little, one of the little ones that you just charge things up with. And also, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but I always keep a little bit of cash at home with me just in case something crazy happens. Not a ton, but just enough to maybe get by for a day or two if we absolutely needed it and couldn't, and the power was out, a widespread power outage, and they weren't taking cards. But I probably never really thought about the chargers part. I have teenage boys myself, never thought about a charger. I wrote it down, and never thought about medicine. Getting older, I'm having to take medicine now. I wrote that down myself. So I'm learning from Melody this afternoon as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you all so much for sharing your go-tos and your emergency kits. Want to transition a little bit to what Efren and Daniel were talking about in terms of how the tropics are heating up right now. So can you tell us, why is this happening and why this time of year?
Well, the one thing about this time of the year is, if you recall, hurricane season really starts on June 1st, and it goes all the way until the end of November. Climate-wise, that's when obviously June we start warming up, not only here in South Carolina, but throughout the entire Southeast and along the Gulf. Well, we get warmer, things get conducive enough in which we have storms. Here in South Carolina, typically, and I say typically, we start ramping things up in July and into August. But as we have seen before, especially this year, we've seen where it's started up early. So is this of things to come? Perhaps, but Daniel and I have seen this way too many times especially over the last 10 years. And Daniel being a native South Carolinian, we've seen only too well, Daniel, where it's not only starting earlier, but it's getting even more frequent.
Yeah, I was thinking back to 92, and it didn't impact South Carolina, but Hurricane Andrew was the first named storm, and it was in the middle of August. The first named storm in 1992 was in the middle of August, and we've had named storms in May, these quote preseason storms, the last, I think, 7 or 8 years. And so the frequency of these storms seem to be increasing a little bit. And we're kind of in this busy period ever since basically the mid 90s. We've had this busier than normal hurricane season. And it's almost odd that we now expect to hear them say it's going to be busier than normal. It would be a shock for the NOAA to say it's not going to be as busy. So it looks like we're in this busy period, and until we can kind of break out of it, I would expect busier seasons. And I know we're going to probably talk a little bit about climate change, and it may be something that we may have to deal with for a longer period.
And the one thing is that we were talking about how early this starts. Well, if you take a look, if we have this one graphic number 1, we see that we've had storms that have just started way too early. In fact, this year has been now the 7th consecutive year we have a tropical named cyclone before June 1st, which is a little bit crazy, but this is now the 3rd consecutive year where we've had more than the actual forecasted amount of named storms than what NOAA has forecasted. Now, granted that July, Daniel, Alex, and I were talking about for the last week and a half, it's been a quiet July. We had 28 days where we didn't talk about anything, and now we're talking about more storms that are evolving. So, is this thing of things to come? Perhaps, but if anything teaches us lessons learned over the last several years, yes, it starts early, but it definitely ramps up as we get into the beginning of August, like we see now.
Speaking of ramping up, you all talked about the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, how they issued their May forecast, and then they just updated that within the last month as well. And it looks like some areas have close to doubled. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that change and why that's occurred?
Every year, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Hurricane Center sends out a bulletin to all the meteorologists. Andrew Phillips is the hurricane manager over at EMD, sees this all the time. And the two forecasts that we see is one that comes out in early May to talk about what the entire Atlantic season is. The second one comes out at the end of June, early August, to indicate where we are mid-season for the rest of the year. Every report that we've had from the National Hurricane Center and from NOAA over the last 7 years, by mid-season, their forecasts dramatically jump up. So we have seen a trend over the last decade in which the forecasts aren't wrong. The forecasts are designed on the average of 10 or 20 years of what the climate has been. But our climate over the last 10 to 20 years has been a lot more aggressive than in the past. So whenever you see, oh, we're probably going to have maybe 13 to 15 named storms, and then all of a sudden in August, make that 17 to 21. It's not that they're wrong, it's just that the projections are now showing more and more where things are getting escalated than they were originally forecasted. Last year, we thought that we'd only have about 12 to 15 storms, and that was projected in May of 2020. By August of 2020, now we're talking 15 to 17. We ended up with a lot more than that.
So
And this year, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Daniel.
And this year in particular, the thought process is La Nina is going to come back into play. And so you're talking about colder Pacific waters, warmer Atlantic waters, and then you're talking about less wind shear to kind of tear the systems apart. And so you got some other factors, and now they're expecting this La Nina to develop. So that's why they're expecting maybe a few more storms than what they initially thought. And so it's, we wish it were El Nino as opposed to La Nina, but, that's the cards we're dealt sometimes. And sometimes the forecast can go the opposite direction, but all indications are it'll probably be busy again.
Now, whether we're talking about the remnants of a tropical storm, or a hurricane, Andrew and Melody, would you be able to talk about the impact, no matter what the system looks like, what that impact looks like for us?
Emily, I think what you said there, the key term there is impacts. That's what we're always looking at, whether it's the remnants of a system, tropical storm, hurricane, whatever it is, it's what are those forecasted impacts going to be? Not even necessarily the track or the strength, especially inland. We've seen over the past few years, weaker storms, stronger storms cause significant amounts of damage, even to the state. We're talking, a lot of times we think the term only a Category 1, only a tropical storm. But Matthew and Florence were both only Category 1s when they came into South Carolina. So that's what we're focused on so much is what are those impacts going to be from whatever it is. We know each storm is different. Each storm is going to have different hazards to our state. And that's what our main focus and main message is always going to be in terms of preparedness, public messaging, is we got to prepare for what's coming our way and not necessarily just what strength it is or does it have a name or not. But that's what we really want to hammer home to everybody.
Yeah, and let me just add, the South Carolina State Climatology Office published a really interesting report this year that I really enjoyed being new to the state of South Carolina, but I now call myself a South Carolinian. And they said, really, if they looked at the history of storms coming into South Carolina and using that historical data going back to, I believe it was even to 1851, there is like almost an 80% likelihood that you will be affected by a tropical storm. Now, will that be high winds? Will that be storm surge? Will that be flooding? What Andrew said it perfectly. Every storm will look different to every person, how it affects you. But the key is in South Carolina, we do need to be prepared.
So we're
Let me just add to that Paul just asked a question, who's attending the meeting right now. He said he'd never thought about I need legal documents, and he asked, well, where can I go to find out what I need to put in my go bag? Well, this is a great resource. American Red Cross. A lot of people think, okay, they're just there for disasters. Well, just here in the Midlands alone, we had a family that were displaced due to a fire. It was one family. American Red Cross was there to help. So American Red Cross helps in many different ways. And if you think about hurricane season, we have wind, flood, power outages, tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, lightning, the whole gamut. So when it comes to that, American Red Cross, as well as South Carolina Emergency Management Division, on their website alone has all the information of, well, what do you think I should put in my go bag other than the obvious? You can go to their website and look at the information that they say. And this is not just preparing for a hurricane, but this is preparing for in the event of some kind of house displacement disaster. And that's an important thing to remember, because not only are we talking about the peak of hurricane season now, but a lot of people just think hurricanes, oh, okay, it's going to be the wind. There's a lot more elements that's going to unfortunately displace us out of our home, not just the winds. So Paul, thank you for asking that question. A lot of people were probably thinking the exact same thing.
And let me just add, thanks for bringing that up and doing the plug so good. This week, if you go to www.redcross.org/prepare South Carolina, Thursday at 6:30, we're going to be talking about Be Red Cross Ready and diving in for about 30 to 45 minutes on our website, free. And it'll probably be me. You'll even see me saying, this is what you need to do to prepare. These are the exact items that you need to put in your emergency supply list. So in addition, that information is widely available on the websites, but you can also join free presentations where we dive in deep on that.
Speaking of diving a little deeper, we're going to get a little technical here. Efren and Daniel, I know a lot of times when forecasting storms, we hear a lot about the quadrants of storms, and we hear about the cone of uncertainty. And sometimes the cone of uncertainty shifts a good bit, and people are wondering, am I going to be on this side or that side of the storm? Would you be able to provide some clarity for us on both of those elements?
Well, I'm going to let Daniel take this one, because we had a big discussion a couple of years ago. How do we show our viewers on television what we're actually talking about? And Daniel has done a great job of explaining it, but also showing it, Daniel.
Yeah, we with the cone of uncertainty, I mean, it is uncertain. But one thing about the cone of uncertainty that we were really trying to relay to people is, even though you see that cone, you can't just pay attention to that cone. There's still odds that it could go outside of that cone. And these storms are huge sometimes. And so the impacts can be outside of this cone. And so you don't want to pay just attention to the cone, and the cone can shift. Luckily though, over the last, I've been in TV for almost 20 years now, these cones have gotten better and better. The National Hurricane Center does a great job on forecasting these things, but we still can get, it's about a 66% chance that the center of that storm will go inside of that cone, but there's about a 33% chance it could go outside of that cone. And so that's what we have to relay, is even though there's the cone of uncertainty, it's just that there's a lot of uncertainty with it. You mentioned the quadrants. The quadrants, typically it's the northeast quadrant or the front right quadrant as the storm's traveling. And so that's typically where you're going to see the strongest winds. That's where you're going to see the worst storm surge. And when the tropical system makes landfall, that's where you typically would see the tornado outbreaks. And that might be the one thing that, as somebody that's lived in South Carolina my whole life, that's what I'm always probably a little bit more concerned with, especially being in the Midlands. Maybe not so much the hurricane, but the tornadoes. Some of our biggest tornado outbreaks in South Carolina have been tropical storms. Beryl in, I believe it was 1994, and then Francis in 2004. These were huge tornado outbreaks, and they were because of tropical storms in the right front quadrant.
I'm going to open up this next question to all of our panelists. When it comes to relaying information, how do you walk that fine line between making sure that your audience understands the importance of what's coming and what to expect in that impact, but also not causing a panic as well?
Well, I'll tell you that I am a born and bred Yankee. Lived in New York my entire life, then went to college in Oklahoma. And I will tell you that if you told me that when I was 18 that I've got a Category 4 hurricane, possibly turning to a Category 5 Dorian heading towards my doorstep, I would be in an absolute complete panic. So the first and foremost important information is to be calm. Here's the information of what it is. And keep in mind that this information is going to be divulged from several government and television locations. It's going to be on television, radio, and then not only from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but all the way down to the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. And then, of course, all of their vendors from there, including the American Red Cross. So people are widespread understood of what's going on. But it's very important to get the information from a specific, reliable, and official location. That in this day of social media, we can get our information wherever we want. But it's very important to get the information from an official statement from wherever it may be, as opposed to Johnny Doe, who says that, well, this is what it's going to be like, and extrapolates information from various places, may think in a different way, but regardless of the magnitude or their lack of what the tropical complex heading our way is, you want to make sure that that is reliable information.
That's a great point, Efren. Reliable information. I mean, like you were saying, I think if my dog can get a weather Facebook page, then it's probably not a good source of information all the time to be looking to that. It's great that there's so many ways to get information. I know we're probably going to talk about social media, some of the pluses, minuses with that coming up soon. And it's so great that we have such an easy way to get information, but it's also can be detrimental if you're not getting it from that trusted source. So I think for us, a consistent message with simple instructions, explanation of what we're doing, and knowing that when we're going out there, we're giving the best information we have available at the time, and it's all in the name of life safety. So that's the main thing was we're pushing is that's our main concern is life safety. So whatever that message looks like, we want to just make sure we're consistent with that and able to provide simple instructions to those listening.
You just mentioned social media, so let's go ahead and jump into that. How has social media changed the way that we report or the way that we see what's happening around us? Especially now, everyone has a cell phone, it seems like, where you can grab photos, you can grab video, you can kind of share what's happening outside of your door safely, we might add. But how has that kind of changed the landscape of reporting or talking about the impact of storms?
I'll jump in here. I have a little bit of a different perspective on this because prior to joining Red Cross, I worked internationally, and I can tell you social media was amazing because you wanted to be able to see what was going on. Maybe we were working in Haiti or the Dominican Republic where you don't have eyes and visibility on it, and the social media, you can see exactly what's going on. However, there is a downside to that, and that's disinformation. So many times when we would get video in or even photos in, we would send it to our media area, let them validate it and they would come back, that's a photo from 2017 in this area and that. So you have to be really, really careful. Yes, I love social media. We're going to get great information, but going back to where is the validated information? That's going to be from your local officials and authorities, state EMD. All those things is what you need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, especially in the 2015 flood, people are sending us all kinds of images, and some of the images, one of them, I remember one in particular, it was an image of a crocodile, and they said it was Finley Park, and some people took that and ran with it and put it on television, and all of a sudden your credibility is gone because we don't have crocodiles in South Carolina. And so, yeah, you have to be really careful with that information. For us, from a television standpoint, I will say sometimes if there's a localized storm, it really does give us those eyes to maybe an area that we may not get to, Fairfield County, Kershaw County, and we can see the damage for something that's happening. But you're right, you have to be real careful with those images because some people are trying to look to fool you.
And that's the thing that, social media, especially over the last decade, really is a double-edged sword. But let me just focus on the positives. For those of you who don't know, when South Carolina Emergency Management Division goes on some kind of alert status, they have multiple agencies, counties that are there at the Emergency Management Division. I'll just give you one example. During the 2015 flood, our television station had multiple crews out, but we only had a few crews out. And mind you, we cover in the Midlands, but there were horrible disasters that were happening anywhere in Williamsburg, Berkeley, Sumter counties that we could only report on from what we were hearing. Now, picture this. For whatever reason, information is not getting to the TV stations so that they could broadcast it and let everybody know. Or even worse, information for whatever reason is delayed by maybe 2 or 3 minutes from some counties that are being reported directly to the Emergency Management Division. But social media, all of a sudden, there's a notification from WLTX or from the American Red Cross in which they retweeted and verified that here's a picture of a road that is completely wiped out. Now Emergency Management Division is like, guys, look at that picture. And now they have an instantaneous response. Now, for those of you who are not as old as me, like, let me paint a picture when we didn't have internet or the World Wide Web, or we had Twitter. If we had this situation like we had during Hurricane Hugo, in which the one and only information we could find out in Richland County of what was going on in Charleston County was by television and television alone. Think of how much more information we could have conveyed to the Midlands as Hugo was coming through Charleston County 2 hours beforehand that we can prepare all of us on television, at emergency management, at American Red Cross. So there are many positives when it comes to social media. The biggest one is that the information instantaneously shared between every department and every factor for the public now comes out in a blink of an eye. And that is a major asset because not all television stations and agencies throughout South Carolina can be everywhere at once.
I was looking to see if we can shift now to recovery. So when we talk about storms, typically we talk about events that maybe last a day or a couple of days. But when we go to talk about recovery, it seems like this is something that goes weeks, months, maybe even years. Andrew and Millie, would you be able to talk about that recovery process? And then also, would you be able to talk a little bit about, we often talk about how people or individuals would be impacted, but would you be able to cover homes, agriculture, animals, kind of encompassing in that recovery as well?
Sure. I think a big thing when we're thinking about recovery is preparedness beforehand. Like you mentioned, recovery can take a long time, especially if there's a lot of damage from a lot of different things. And we want to make sure that everyone is as prepared as they can be before. So that's making sure you have adequate insurance for your home and your property. Doing maintenance around your home to make sure that once we do get an event, if it does hit your home, you were able to limit the damage the best you can. Because that's really the priority. It's not, FEMA's not there to make you whole again. If they come in to do, it's an assistance thing. So as much as you can, don't count on that as your main source of recovery should something happen. Make sure you can have as much in place beforehand, take as much of the preparation as you can before something happens. So the recovery effort it's still going to be stressful, still going to be painful, obviously, but you can make it a little bit easier on yourself if you take some of those precautions beforehand. And you mentioned animals, agriculture. We work closely with Clemson Livestock Poultry Health for a lot of that information. They have a lot of things on their website about that, a lot of resources for pets, livestock, agriculture. And there's a lot of similar information there, is how you can limit how much recovery or how much effort you have to put in during recovery should you have an event.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. The bottom line is recovery is hard. Recovery is super, super hard. Many times you've lost everything. You're dealing with the emotional toll of that. And there's not enough resources to rebuild. There's housing limitations. You're having to face all that. So the more that you can do to prepare ahead of time, to have a plan in place for your pets, for your home, protections in place that you can access, such insurance. I mean, all this is great information. The more you can do ahead of time, hoping that you never have to encounter a disaster. But if you do it ahead of time, it will not make it completely painless. It will still be hard, but you're giving yourself the best shot to rebuild as quickly as possible in what is going to be a hard situation.
I'm hoping that we can have a little reflective moment. So I'm going to pose this next question to all the panelists. South Carolina, and Melody, I know that you said that you're relatively new over the last year, but South Carolina has been directly and indirectly impacted by storms over the years. So I'm wondering if you all can share one storm in particular that stands out in your mind and why that is.
Well, I'll give my little 2 cents worth here. The October 2015 flood was the first time in 4 years that I've had a weather event directly impact me. For those of you who don't know, the WLTX News 19 station is on Garner's Ferry Road, right across from the Target. I lived in an apartment complex behind it, which happens to be right up along Gills Creek. Well, long story short, at the time, South Carolina weatherman, Chief Meteorologist Jim Gandy, and I were working that Saturday morning when the flood started. And about 10 o'clock, we're about 7 hours into the news, into live coverage. One of our photojournalists was at the McDonald's that faced Gills Creek, and the camera turned, and all I saw was a 10-foot wall of water over the crossroad of where it goes into my apartment complex. I saw it, couldn't believe it, and then I got it out of my mind. Well, my dog Moose was there at the time. So finally, Governor Haley got on, and I asked him if I can head over there. There's only two ways to get there, and both of them were underwater anywhere from 3 feet to 10 feet. So I parked it close to Target and I walked. I was still in my seat, by the way. I walked all the way up to the apartment complex, got the dog, got the crate, got everything I needed for him and me, and walked back. It takes me 2 minutes to drive to my apartment from the station. It took me almost 2 hours round trip to get back. Note to everyone, if you are in a situation like this, make sure you have a change of clothes, because for those of you who remember, I brought a change of clothes of everything except another suit. And the suit that I came back with after I rescued Moose, I was knee-high in mud. So I had to wear the same suit for 3 days. But a very traumatic thing that I went through on that, and bar none, that I will never forget.
I won't have a South Carolina story yet, except the Easter tornadoes breakout from 2020. That was less than 60 days after me joining Red Cross, and every single what we call chapter at Red Cross. So think all throughout South Carolina, we had, I believe it was over 38, maybe tornadoes touched down. That I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Tornado Alley and stuff. That really affected me. I will say, kind of to build on that too, Hurricane Katrina, while I know it wasn't in South Carolina, that was the first disaster I was ever active in responding to. It made such an impact on me of what people needed during the times of disaster, and the response of the community how it's so needed in times of disaster. It inspired me so much that became my career. So disaster, when you live through it or you respond to it in some way, it's gonna make a mark on your heart. So absolutely.
I can go if y'all want me to. I'm gonna show my age. It was probably the 1984 tornadoes that really went through Newberry, Winnsboro, and Marlborough County. And at the time, I was in first grade, and it destroyed the school I was going to. And I don't know, there was a ton of people killed that March day. And then I guess maybe neck and neck was 5 years later was Hugo, and Hugo was a hurricane all the way from Charleston through Charlotte. So it was a hurricane through Winnsboro, which is kind of hard to imagine a storm staying hurricane strength all the way through South Carolina. But those two I probably won't forget ever.
Storm I always use as an example when talking about focusing on impacts and not necessarily the track is Hurricane Irma. So that was I've been at EMD since 2015, but that was my first one in my current position, Hurricane Program Manager. So that was a little stressful trying to gear up for that one, especially the way it looked initially. Some of those initial forecasts taking it up the east coast of Florida, headed right towards South Carolina. So that was the concern. Then it started ticking west a little bit. So watching that progression west, there was kind of a sense of relief. But at the same time, with how large the storm was and where it was moving, being on the eastern side of the storm, we knew we were going to see fairly significant impacts in South Carolina anyway. So it was, well, we've kind of felt a little bit of relief that it was not going to hit us head on. It was still, okay, we're still going to get a pretty good storm here. And just how large the wind field was, we saw wind gusts over 50 miles an hour, close to 60 miles an hour, all the way into the upstate. Pretty significant storm surge still along the coast. About 10 inches of rain from a storm that the center actually never crossed into the state. And compare that with some of the other ones like Isaias last year that was, I believe at its closest point, 3 or 4 miles from Horry County, and how few impacts we had from that one compared to a storm that was where the center actually never even crossed into South Carolina. So that one really sticks with me because I think I talk about that a lot as trying to make the point of every storm is going to be different. And you got to focus on with the forecasted hazards and impacts from the storm, not necessarily just looking at where the track is.
Thank you all so much for sharing. And I do want to remind our attendees that if you have any questions for our panelists, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and go ahead and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to some of those coming up here shortly. I did want to ask Andrew and Melody, over the years, how has working and planning with local, state, and national agencies kind of changed?
So unfortunately, we've had multiple disasters over the past several years, as we've all talked about. One good thing about that is that it has helped us all communicate better, working together. We work with our local partners a lot. We're here at State Emergency Management. We support the county, so we're in constant communication with them. And as with every storm, we try to be as prepared as possible. We learn a lot of lessons after every event we go through. What went wrong, what didn't go wrong, what do we need to continue? And it's really trying to focus on that for the next one and making sure we're all working together. So we're a very experienced group now, unfortunately, because it's come with a lot of disasters, but with each event we are, I think, improving just the way we're working with our county partners, other state agencies as well, and how we continue to improve working together. And we're always looking ahead. And even during an event, we know no matter how much we prepare, there's going to be something that comes up that we're not expecting. I think we've all experienced that, and it's having that experience working together, exercising when we're not in hurricane season. I get the question a lot. What do you do when it's not hurricane season? I think most people just assume we kind of hang out, feet up on the desk, not really doing much. But I think that's when we do a lot of our work is when it's not hurricane season. It's exercising, it's developing plans with all of our partners to make sure that we're as prepared as we can be for the upcoming hurricane season and any other disaster that comes to South Carolina.
Yeah, that trust relationship is really built before a disaster. And I, just as a newcomer into South Carolina, I can really see that they've worked hard, and this community, the state of South Carolina, has really partnered with each other, collaborated with each other, so that as a unit, a wider response can be coordinated and can be very specific and laser focused in getting to solutions, both during a disaster, before a disaster, and after disaster. So within Red Cross too, we are powered by the generosity of donors and our volunteers. So we bring in volunteers all the time. If you have a passion of working with state partnerships, relationships, things like that, come to Red Cross. We'll train, give you the empowerment and the equipment, and you'll be put on a team that's led by our senior disaster program manager that's passionate about collaboration all across the state.
And a key thing to let not only all of our viewers, all of the people here in Richland County, but if you also have family anywhere in the state, that when it comes to television and radio, there are 6 different areas that are considered handled by different television and radio stations. You have the upstate, the Midlands, the Augusta area, you have the PD, the Grand Strand, and then you have Hilton Head, Savannah. And all 6 areas do one specific thing. Doesn't matter which television station it is. Every single one of them gets the exact same information from the American Red Cross SC and from South Carolina EMD. They send that information out to every single one of the TV stations. So you're talking out of six different markets. You're talking probably about in the tune of about 18 to 20 TV stations, and every single one of them gets that information, and that information is sent out at the exact same time, so everybody is informed of what's going on. So it's not like, South Carolina Emergency Management is limited. They don't have a TV station themselves, but they work with their partners like the TV stations, and so does the American Red Cross. They don't have a TV station, but they send it out to the stations, so the stations, in cooperation with them, can get that vital information out. And it's not like they get it and you get it maybe a day or 2 later. The TV stations will let you know if it's that critical. It'll be on the news quite quickly.
To all of our panelists, what is your go-to source to get up-to-date information? Like what is programmed on your computer, your phone? Where do you go to get that reliable information?
I go to state EMD. We're getting information coming in internally. I am on staff at Red Cross, so I see it in my emails, but also download their emergency app. Red Cross has an emergency app, but in South Carolina, you want to be listening to your local authorities. My local authority that I really pay attention to is state EMD.
Thank you for that, Melody. That way I don't have to do a shameless plug of our own stuff. That's right. She said we have scemd.org, hurricane.sc, which is new for this year. It's something we developed. We've had the hurricane guide for several years, the paper copy, and then we have a hard copy online. But hurricane.sc is an interactive version of the hurricane guide. So all sorts of information on there that we try to push out. And then Melody, again, you mentioned our SCEMD mobile app. I think it's great. Of course, that's because I work there. Not just because I work there, but I think it's a great app.
So I know that it's a huge subject to get into our last 10 minutes, but Efren and Daniel, I'm going to turn to y'all because I know this can be a program in itself talking about climate change. And then we also had a new United Nations report that came out earlier this month, kind of talking about some of the conditions that they are seeing and some of their findings. Would you all be able to talk a little bit about that and how that is impacting current and maybe future hurricane seasons?
I'll start it off, and then Daniel can bring us in on this as well. But for those of you who've been hearing about climate change, global warming, there's a report that comes out at least once a year. And the latest report that came out stated that 2 major factors that they put in this publication is how our temperatures have been dramatically increasing not only over the last 10 years or 20 years, but over the last 100 years. And regardless of how you see it scientifically, there may be a correlation to how much CO2 or carbon dioxide emissions that has been recorded. Now, people will ask us all the time, how do you know what the carbon emissions were 100 years ago? I mean, what do? You have a clock that goes back? Well, there's various ways that scientists were able to find out how much carbon dioxide was in the air at that time. One way is to the soil. The carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide is actually absorbed by plants and trees, and then trees give off oxygen, like the rainforest in Brazil. So the short answer is they have seen the amount of carbon dioxide levels as well as the temperature both increase exponentially in this report. And that is a growing concern. Is there a connection to our weather? Regardless of what kind of weather you're talking about, drought, flood, hurricanes, tornadoes, and I've been here in South Carolina since 2015. Daniel has been here since 1902. So I'm pretty sure Daniel could tell you how much the weather, obviously not only in Fairfield County, but as a professional in Richland County and in the Midlands. Daniel, your weather has changed. You've seen the physical change of our weather over the last several years that you could see the difference.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is just the extreme that we see that from I think about just snow. I know we've been talking about hurricanes, but I remember people say all the time, it seemed like it would snow once a year, and it seems like it doesn't anymore in South Carolina. Now, I'm not saying that's part of climate change, but maybe it is. And anything, what I tell my kids, if there's anything that we can do to help the environment, if we think we're causing an issue for the environment, we should at least look at it and try to solve that. And going back to hurricanes, though, if things are warming up, especially the sea surface temperatures, that can have a direct correlation on the amount of tropical systems we have. If we have more tropical systems, then the odds increase that we can have landfalling tropical systems. So I guess some of you probably heard of the butterfly effect. Those small little changes in things can cause huge problems and chaos in the greater scheme of things. So I guess my message would be, if there's anything that we think we can do to help the environment, certainly try to do it, because we only get one world and we want to make it better when we leave it. Don't make it worse. That would be my little soapbox speech.
You talk about the potential for more storms. So Andrew, Melody, are we ready for that next storm? Are we prepared to tackle that next storm?
I'll chime in. At Red Cross, we, if you look at my title, it says South Carolina region of the American Red Cross. So I'm going to talk from the American Red Cross standpoint. We have moved, which is nationally, we have moved from what we used to call a readiness standpoint, that we responded to acute disasters, meaning we're going to have a disaster here, we'll have a disaster here, a month later, and we'll respond to that when we'll have a disaster here. We have now officially changed our approach, where we now expect chronic disasters. We expect Red Cross to be responding to larger scale disasters, let's say at least affecting over 50 families or more. I'll use that as kind of a little estimate, constantly, concurrently, all the time. So we've changed it. Are we ready? Yeah, we know this, we're making plans for this, we've improved communication, we're doing solid, but can we do more? Yeah, and that doesn't just involve the ones of us that are talking on the screen right now. That's all of us. So can we do more? Yes, we need people to give of their blood if that's something that you're willing to do. We need people who are willing to volunteer their time, maybe sign up with Red Cross if you enjoy logistics, especially if you're willing to go work in shelters, or if you have a health service background. We need that right now. So there are needs. We are working to be prepared. There's always more that we can do to be prepared. So yes, we're prepared. We need to do a lot more.
And Melody, I think you mentioned preparedness. I think we're as prepared as we can be. That's always what we're striving for, and always trying to push forward. What things haven't we thought of yet? What could the next disaster bring? And one thing we do is we'll look at, talking about hurricanes, we'll look at other places around the country. Hurricane Harvey, for example, the way that made landfall, rapidly intensified, then made landfall as a major hurricane, and then dumped a ton of rain, over 50 inches in some areas. We were looking at that. Okay, if a Harvey scenario were to strike South Carolina, what if we did see a rapidly intensifying storm in a short time frame coming onshore? How would we be ready for that? So that's something we're always trying to think ahead of. What haven't we experienced yet, and what could we potentially see, and how would we handle that? And of course, there's always going to be things like I mentioned before that we can't anticipate. But what if we were to have that, for example, of a storm rapidly intensifying? How quickly could we move things? And what do we need to accomplish to make, for life safety purposes for everybody, as quickly as possible?
I know it's hard to believe, but an hour has already come and gone. I know we could probably talk about this for the rest of the afternoon, but I was hoping to go around the virtual room and get final thoughts from our panelists.
I'll go ahead and start and say that, first of all, Emily, both you and Richland Library, thank you so much for hosting this. I think the biggest important take-home message, not only as a panelist, but as an attendee, is there are things that I've heard that I didn't think of when it came to hurricanes, and there are resources that I can reach out to that I didn't think that that would be important enough to me. So I think we've gotten this information out that is going to benefit a lot of people in the future if unfortunately we're going to have to deal with some kind of personal disaster when it comes to hurricane season.
Yeah, thank you guys for putting this together. I will say, for the people watching, I'm very active on social media. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can always reach out to me on Facebook or Twitter. I'm usually pretty receptive. Just don't yell at me if they get the forecast wrong, but you can reach out to me and I can try to answer any more questions if you have anything. But thank you guys for putting this together. I think it was very informative.
I'll just add, from preparedness is so important. That's really what it is. If that was one thing that you take away from us talking today, is that it's really important for you and your household to be prepared. You have tools and resources available from Red Cross. We start helping people starting at age 3. I wish I had my Prepare with Pedro hat right now on how to learn to be prepared ahead of a disaster. So that is one thing that I would like to leave with you. It is on you to take the action step today to move you and your household one more step towards being prepared, as well as your community. Keep your eye out for vulnerable populations, maybe people in your community that might need a little extra assistance when a disaster would come. Know that, because it's a community approach before a disaster, it's a community approach during a disaster, and it's a community approach after. So knowledge is power. The knowledge is there. Come to Red Cross, come hang out with us, and we'll train you as much as possible to be prepared. And if you ever find yourself in a disaster, we do respond to disasters every single day. Remember 1-800-RED-CROSS, and we will be there to help you in the immediate aftermath of a disaster.
For me too, thank you for putting this on. Always happy to talk preparedness and talk hurricanes. One thing I've been thinking about is, it's been since Hurricane Hugo. We brought up Hugo before. It's a benchmark storm for a lot of us, especially for Daniel. You mentioned it a lot. You've been in South Carolina for a long time. It's still the benchmark storm, but we're getting pretty far away from that now. So it's been over 30 years since we've seen a direct landfall from a major hurricane in South Carolina. And thinking about now, it's kind of uncomfortable, but how many people weren't even born yet, or were too small to remember that? But also, we've seen such a huge population growth in South Carolina. Of course, everybody wants to move here, wants to live here. That's great. But how many of those people, that's right, Melody is one of them. She had to come down here, but for all those people who have moved down here since then, they don't remember that storm. They've heard the stories about it, seen some pictures about it, but that's not really going to resonate very much. So it's trying to push them to thinking about the next one. I think that a lot of that mentality, I think we've all seen it, we've all heard it, is I knew the forecast, I knew that it could happen, but I just didn't think it could happen to me. Trying to get rid of that mentality and being as ready as you can before the storm. But I think one thing that probably brings us all some comfort is, even though we've seen all these disasters over the past several years, we've really been able to see South Carolinians rally together, helping each other out. We've seen a lot of those stories as well. I know you guys, Efren, Daniel, I'm sure you've seen a lot of those coming into the newsroom, especially after the floods here in Richland County, of just everyone helping out each other. And I think that can all bring some comfort to us, knowing that at least as a community, we're all willing to rally together to help each other out in those tough times.
That is really comforting and a great note to end on. We want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time and expertise. And we want to thank all of you for joining us and sharing your insights and your questions, whether it's hurricane season or not. Weather impacts our daily lives. So we hope that you learned something new and gained some valuable information. As a reminder, a recording of this program will be made available on Richland Library's YouTube channel, so people can access it on demand. In addition, please also visit richlandlibrary.com to explore the impact of tropical systems in South Carolina through the historic digital collections from our Walker Local and Family History Center. And check back with us later this week for a complete list of resources that were shared throughout this program. So we'll be working to get those up on our website. Again, we appreciate you attending hurricane season reaching the peak, and we hope everyone has a wonderful evening.